Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of April of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians are attacking along the entire line from the village of Volodymyrovka towards the village of Yunakivka, and the Russians managed to shorten the distance to the heart of the Yunakiva direction, the settlement of Yunakivka itself, to the minimal distance. So let's discuss in details, and first let's talk about the village of Lokny. As we discussed in the previous video, today the Ukrainian sources published this episode where we can see how the Ukrainians counterattacked the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the central part of the settlement, and in this part of the video we can see how the Ukrainians captured several Russian soldiers in this area. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. Once again, the episode when the Ukrainians captured the Russians took place exactly in this building, we believe, and based on this video we have adjusted the northern part of the village of Lokny in Russian favor, and the territory between the village of Lokny itself along the river of Lokny towards the village of Basovka. Now let's compare the maps. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 7th of April of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 8th of April of 2025. As you can see, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to shorten the distance to the village of Yunakivka itself, and currently the Russians are just at 2.5 kilometers to this village. Furthermore, the Russians are just at 2 kilometers to the main supply road N07 that Ukrainians still use to support their forces on the territory of the settlement by the name of Oleshnya. Today, the official Telegram channel of the Group of Forces North stated that this morning they began offensive operation in this area. Currently, there are fierce clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians on the territory of this village, but we believe and we expect that in the very near future, most likely this upcoming night between the 8th of April of 2025 and the 9th of April of 2025, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the settlement towards more reliable positions. But telling the truth, and due to the Russian progress in the vicinity of Lokny, it is very difficult to understand where exactly the Ukrainians believe they have more or less reliable positions. If you ask my opinion, the nearest, let's say, reliable positions are the positions in this forest. So maybe here the Ukrainians are planning to slow down the Russians, but anyway, let's wait and see. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Guiva direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor because we have lots of icons. First let's compare the maps between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 7th of April of 2025. As you can see, the Russians controlled by the end of the 7th of April around 80-90% of the village of Guiva, and as for the end of the 8th of April, the Russians established complete control over this territory. Furthermore, this information was confirmed both by the official statements of the Russian sources and the Russian, let's say, authorities, and by different geolocations. Let's discuss everything in details. For example, in this video we can see how 4 Russian soldiers were moving around the church in the central part of the village of Guiva, and how 2 Russian soldiers raised their flags. Based on this video we haven't adjusted anything, because the first video, that's where we can see Russian flags in the vicinity of the church, took place on the 6th of April, but most likely this video was published by by the Russians, but most likely this flag was established by the Russian drone. And today, just 2 days after, we got another video where we can see 100% proof of the Russian control over this territory. Furthermore, once again, the Group of Forces North stated that Russians controlled the entire territory of the village. Furthermore, different sources reported that the Russians continue advancing further in the southwestern direction, and currently there are very heavy clashes on the outskirts of the settlement of Garnal. We're talking about this church and about this that complex of the religious complex. So the sources reported, mainly pro-Russian, that currently there are very heavy clashes on the outskirts. Basically, the Russians are trying to attack the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine around this forest. So this is the first stronghold on the Russian way towards the settlement of Garnal. The Russians are attacking, trying to test and trying to check the Ukrainian positions and the Ukrainian defense. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but also very likely that maybe tomorrow we're gonna start receiving first videos from this, let's say, church. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians tried to break through the Ukrainian defense along this road with the purpose to attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine and to answer and to get as close as possible to the small village by the name of Sadki. But the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian plans. For example, in this video we can see how Ukrainian drones were flying above this road and how the Ukrainians, using distance mining method, were establishing mines along possible Russian roads of attack. And in this video we can see how the Russian vehicles entered this minefield, and that as a result of this situation the Russians lost several armored vehicles that they were planning to use most likely to attack this territory. Anyway, despite the fact and regarding the situation that the Russians lost vehicles, during that video we couldn't see even a single moment that Ukrainians attacked the Russian soldiers, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. We believe that the Russians have greater control over the territory in this area, but as for now we have adjusted this big huge forest, which is obviously also a very important achievement of the armored forces of the Russian Federation on their way to the Sumy region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupyansk direction. According to information we have, currently there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement by the name of Kondrashovka. The Ukrainians most likely realized that situation is critical, and the Ukrainians managed to bring additional forces, reinforcements and reserves with the purpose to stabilize the situation. As for now we have different opinions and different updates regarding this territory. Some sources reported that the Russians managed to secure the village of Kondrashovka completely. Some sources reported that the Russians control just the northeastern part. As for geolocations, we see that there are still Ukrainians almost on the territory of the entire village. We still haven't received even a single geolocation or even a single report published by either neutral resources or pro-Ukraine resources or pro-Russian resources that confirm the presence of the Russian forces on the territory of this village. We see one thing, that there are very heavy clashes and the Russians are using all types of weapons they have with the purpose to destroy as many as possible positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory. So the Russians and the Ukrainians understand the value, realize the value of this village. If Ukrainians lose control over this territory, the entire front line could collapse automatically. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Barova Leman direction. We have lots of very interesting updates. So let's start. Yesterday, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kostiantynivka. Based on this report that was published yesterday by the Russians, we have adjusted the map and we have colored huge territories in the Russian favor. And today, on the 8th of April of 2025, we got this video. In this video published by the 144th Division, we can see, and the 20th Army, we can see the entire process, how the Russians were clearing, how the Russians were attacking, clearing, bombing the village of Kostiantynivka. We will not watch the entire video because there are lots of episodes of violence and many other things that we can't show during the video, but we will watch just the final episode of this video where we can see two Russian soldiers that were waving with their hands and waving with the Russian flag. This place and this episode was geolocated, and this is exactly the point where the two Russian soldiers were waving with the Russian flag. Based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything. This video just confirms the presence of the Russian forces in this area and that the Russians have strong control over this territory. Several resources reported that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions. Let's compare the map. This is, for example, the situation by the end of the 7th of April of 2025, and this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 8th of April of 2025. As you can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the eastern part of the village of Nova, and the Russians managed to create very strong positions before further offensive operation in the western direction. So we expect decisive attack from the Russian side during the next several hours. Furthermore, the Russians managed to cut the main supply road. We are talking about the 0526 road that goes between the settlements of Nova further in the northern directions towards the settlement of Dzerzhinsk. The Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory according to pro-Russian resources, according to neutral mappers, so which means that Ukrainians on the territory of Nova were cut from supply and support. They currently have just one line from the settlement of Ritkadub, which is most likely already under complete Russian FPV and drone control. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions in the field, so we see that Ukrainians show no resistance and that Ukrainians retreat towards more reliable positions. As for now, more reliable positions for Ukrainians is the village of Novomikhailivka, where the Ukrainians are trying to prepare a temporary defense positions before further clashes and before further offensive operation from the Russian side. Most likely the Ukrainians have several weeks or maybe several days or maybe 1 week to improve their positions in this area, because this time the Russians most likely would be forced and would be focused to clear these settlements, Lipovo, Novo and Redkadub, and only then most likely the Russians will continue their offensive. So anyway, the situation for the Ukrainians here is very critical. At the same time, the Russians are not reducing their pressure on the territory of Nadia, which is under control of the 3rd Azov Brigade, Assault Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. The Russians continue bombing and attacking this area, forcing the Ukrainians to keep the reserves and soldiers in this direction and not redeploying them to the south, which is obviously can be probably the decisive reason why the Ukrainians can lose the entire positions and the entire line between the village of Kopanki and the village of Nova. So we expect additional advance of the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation in the very near future. Now let's move to the Leman, to the original Leman direction itself. Today we have also lots of updates. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and according to very reliable sources, very reliable pro-Russian resources and very reliable pro-neutral resources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians attacked and destroyed a temporary positions of the Armored Forces of Ukraine in the territory of Dzerzhinsk. We can't tell for sure whether the Russians managed to destroy these positions, but obviously the explosion is very big. Anyway, at the same time, while the Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainian reserves in the territory of Dzerzhinsk and mainly the Ukrainian positions of the FPV drone operators, the main Russian army is trying to advance along 0528 road in the direction of the settlement of Tarskoye. As a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to take under control up to 50% of the settlement. And this report we got by the morning of the 8th of April of 2025, and most likely during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. So we believe and we expect that this upcoming night, we're going to start receiving first updates that confirm Russian presence, the Russian presence in the southern part of the settlement. And probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, if all these updates are correct, we're going to receive most likely the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and probably the video with the Russian flag. So we expect that in the very near future we're going to start changing the map in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the city of Siversk, where the Russians carry out another offensive operation. And according to this offensive, the Russians managed to dig in deeper between the Ukrainian positions and to take under control one of the most important tree line in this area. The Russians continue their offensive. We have video published by the Ukrainian side where we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian units and the Russian soldiers in this area. And one of the episodes took place exactly in this line. So the Russians continue offensive, and we believe that during the next several days the Russians will try to move further in the northwestern direction, trying to cut these three cities from each other. We are talking about the settlement of Serebryanka, the key settlement along Seversky Donetsk River. We are talking about the village of Grigorovka, and of course we are talking about the settlement of Siversk. The Russians are trying to get as close as possible and as deep as possible between these villages and the city, with the purpose to separate them from each other and to to ruin the logistic, and then to handle with every single town separately. So probably the decisive phase of the battle for Siversk has begun. The Russians are pushing from the east, the Russians are pushing from the north. So very interesting updates we should wait from this area during the next several months. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasaviar. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed the situation, they confirmed the information that Ukrainians face very big problems on the territory of the city of Chasaviar. As you can see, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and their update, there are almost no places, no positions in the central, north and the southern part of the city of Chasaviar where the Ukrainians have strong control. We have just the territories under complete Russian control and the territories that are considered as a contested area or the gray zone. Currently, the main clashes are taking place for this central part. The Russians are advancing advancing, trying to tighten the noose around Ukraine positions. As we can see, the Russians are not trying to assault with this area because they understand that they can suffer losses, so that is why they try to force the Ukrainians to fall back during this or another night. Anyway, we expect that maybe if not this upcoming night, but maybe tomorrow or the day after, the Ukrainians will make this decision and they will start retreating towards reliable positions in the micro district of Shevchenka and on the territory of the village of Mykolaiivka. The battle for the city of Chasaviar is coming to the end. Now let's discuss the situation around the city of Toretsk, and today we have very important video and very important situation. According to different mappers, according to both pro-Russian, pro-neutral and pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the city of Toretsk. Every single source report that the Ukrainians don't have strong positions on the territory of the settlement. There are several pockets of resistance and several micro-districts where Ukrainians still have possibilities to send their sabotage and reconnaissance group with the purpose to probably counterattack the Russians and deal them some damage, but we see that despite all these things, the Russians are advancing and they are finishing the battle. And today we got probably one of the most important geolocation, which was geolocated exactly in this point. We will not watch this video till the end because there are lots of episodes how Ukrainians were attacking the Russian soldiers, lots of violence and many other things that is not good to show. But one of the episodes of Ukraine attacks with the use of a drone took place exactly in this point. The Ukrainians attacked not the vehicles, they attacked not the very big group of forces, but Ukrainians attacked several soldiers of another sabotage and reconnaissance group that were trying to get as close as possible to these facilities. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor along the railways. We see that the Russians are advancing. And due to this report and due to this geolocation, we expect and we believe that the Russians are planning to offensive operation to attack these facilities in the very near future. This is the key facilities for the armored force of Ukraine in this direction. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control and to force the Ukrainians to fall back, this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster for the armored force of Ukraine on this entire direction. Then it will going to be very difficult to understand where Ukrainians would be able to stop the Russians, because from these facilities most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back and to abandon their positions from the villages of Shcherbinovka and Novospaska, because it won't be completely let's say impossible for Ukrainians to hold these territories if the Russians control this area. And obviously if the Russians establish control over this territory, they will have positions where they can hide and where they can prepare and create let's say long-term deployment points. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians most likely managed to both stabilize the situation by taking under control several villages and finishing several battles, and the most important, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to lose control and to return control over the territories they lost during the Ukrainian counterattacks. First, let's talk about the settlement of Lysovka. We have lots of updates from different mappers regarding the situation. Some sources show complete control over this territory. Some sources show just partial control over this territory. Based on the geolocations we've been receiving probably since the beginning of February of 2025, we have colored the village of Lysovka completely. We have geolocations from the north, from the northwest, from the west, from the southeast, from the east. Now we have no doubts that the Russians most likely managed to establish complete control over this territory. At least the Russians managed to reach the northern outskirts of this village. We believe that probably there are still some pockets of resistance and Ukrainians that don't want to surrender. Very likely this is the situation, because the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation still haven't published anything about the positions and about complete control over this territory. So we are waiting for additional update, but most likely this is going to happen in the very near future, and most likely this is going to happen during this week. Now let's move further. The Russians counterattack the Ukrainians in the area of Kotlina and restore control over these facilities. Today we have video. Let's take a look at this video, and here we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to discover the positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation on the territory of this facility, and how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map because now we have proof, we have strong proof that the Russians have strong control control over this territory. That the most important, that this territory used to be under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. They managed to restore control over this territory several weeks ago, but now we have proofs that currently the Russians control this area. This is very important because Ukrainians lost possibilities to supply and support their forces from the settlement of Dachna using this road. The Ukrainians lost these possibilities. Now they need to improve their logistics and to find in another way. At the same time, the Russians, as soon as they block the Ukrainian supply, most likely in the near future, we're going to start receiving a lot of updates of additional Russian progress on the ground in this area. So of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the battle for this settlement is coming to an end as well. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything, and this is the most interesting and the most important. The Russians decided to take operational pause. They're regrouping before another attempt to attack. The sources reported that the Russians are, shortening their, distances, their logistics, trying to improve this, and most likely, and due to the Russian progress on other front lines, we expect that the Russians may attack and may begin a major offensive here as well, and this can lead to unpredictable consequences because the Ukrainians will be forced to bring additional reinforcements to this area from some other region, and we know that Ukrainians currently have lots of problems with this. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. We have lots of videos how the Ukrainians were bringing more and more forces to the line of combat contact, and how the Russians were destroying everything that they managed to discover in the vicinity of their positions, which means that and nobody, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, during the previous 24 hours carried out any attempt to attack each other. So we believe that both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, managed to concentrate significant number of forces in this area, and currently nobody is going to risk or want to risk to begin offensive, to be the first who begins offensive. So we understand that most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians currently have a critical mass in this direction. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, because according to different sources, the Zaporozhye direction could be one of the possible direction for Russian major offensive in the very near future. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.